Sorry. I'm having some technical difficulty just monitoring the YouTube feed, which won't load. And I normally like to keep an eye on it so that I can welcome people. And it's just spinning beach ball of death. Let me try a different way. Maybe just YouTube is down. I don't know. I know you're really bored looking at me, watching my computer screen not load. I don't know what's going on. Well, Nina, please keep an eye on the YouTube, and if people are able to tune in, and you'll welcome them. Okay, but Facebook does seem to be working. So, hello everybody. Let's light up the darkness. You know, it sort of never ends, the new kinds of glitches that we get. It's always something different. I get a feeling that maybe YouTube is down right now. Who knows? Okay. Who's in the house on Facebook? Yehuda in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Stephen in New Hampshire, Shandor in the Bronx, Bill in mid-Missouri, Paul in the Great Northwest, Lucy in Minnesota, Karen in Northern California, Melissa in Great Neck, Guy in Ohio, Joe in the Inland Empire, Diane, that's a new name. Hello, Diana. From Muncie, Nancy in North Carolina. Lucy says YouTube is working. Great. So it's just my feed won't. I can't get anywhere on YouTube. It just spins and spins, and I can't monitor our feed today. Okay. Well, hopefully it's working all right. All right. So our daf today is going to be page 5, daf Hey, here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud. We're going to pick it up at the bottom of page 4b. But let me just note that today is the 150th day since October 7th. I believe there's 134 hostages still being held. Who knows what unspeakable horror they're going through. Please, God, release the hostages. Let them come back from bondage to freedom, from darkness to light. Please, God, end the war with a secure and lasting peace for the Holy Land. We say Amen. And reload. Okay, and we say Amen. All right, so where we've been, we're continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 1 of Bava Metzia. And the law that we're sort of continuing our discussion of, this is how the law ended up, the halacha as it's stated in Shulchan Aruch, that if the plaintiff claimed that he was owed, right, if somebody is saying, you have property of mine, and if the plaintiff claimed that both vessels and land were owed to him by the defendant, and the defendant admitted to owing the plaintiff all of the vessels that he claimed, but he denied that he owed him any of the land, or if he admitted to owing to him all or some of the land, but he denied owing him any of the vessels, then the defendant is exempt from taking an oath by Torah law. If the defendant denied owing him any of the land, but admitting to owing him some of the vessels, while denying that he owed him other vessels, So he's making a partial admission with regard to movable property as opposed to the kind of property that can secure a lien, i.e. land. Then in that case, he is obligated by Torah law to take an oath with regard to the vessels that he denied owing, because he admits, I have some of your vessels, not others. That's partial admission to a claim. That's the situation that gives rise to swearing an oath that you don't know anymore. This is all in the absence of proper evidence, testimony of two witnesses, etc. When we have two witnesses, then we don't have to deal with oaths. Maybe, right? We've seen there is the question, according to Rabbi Chia, that if witnesses established that he has a part, that the claim is partially true, then we might impose an oath on the rest or we might not. But where the law came out just specifically of this thing of vessels and land, now if it was simply, you have a dining room set, right? I lent you a dining room set. So that's utensils, vessels, movable property. And you say, Sal, you lent me the chairs, you didn't lend me the table. I say, I lent you the table. That's a situation where it's a partial admission. So that if we went to a rabbinic court and you say, look, you lent me the chairs, and here they are. Or you lent me the chairs, I gave them back to you. Or you lent me the chairs, they've been destroyed, I'll pay for them. But you never lent me a table. And I said, I did lend you the table and the chairs. Why would I split that up? So that's where you would swear an oath that I did not lend you the table. And since I don't have any further evidence to bring except my word against yours, you taking that oath would excuse you from any further liability beyond what you have admitted. That's with regard to vessels, i.e. movable property. Land is something else, right? Land, even a partial admission with respect to land. For example, you say, Sal, I bought that field. It's my field. I say, I never sold you that field. That field is my field. So now we're having an argument about the field. Now, a field, right, land, even if there's a partial admission, even if you say, well, no, Sal, you did sell me half the field, not the whole thing, or I say I sold you the whole field, you owe me, whatever, there could be a partial admission with respect to this land deal, but then there won't be an oath with respect to the rest of it because land is not subject to oath taking. But here's where it gets interesting. If their claim involved both vessels and land, I sold you or I lent you, as a sharecropper or something, I lent you vessels and land, and you admit that you have in your possession through one of the bailee relationships, we're going to talk about those momentarily, you admit that you have the vessels, some of them, not all of them, then I can make you swear an oath with respect to the vessels that you claim you never received. And now that you're swearing an oath, if there's a relationship between these vessels and land and a piece of land, I can make you swear an oath on the land as well, right? He admitted if he admitted to owing him all or some of the land, but denied owing him any of the vessels, he is exempt from taking an oath by Torah law. If the defendant denied owing him any of the land, but admitting to owing him some of the vessels, while denying that he owed him other of the vessels, then he is obligated by Torah law to take an oath with regard to the vessels that he denied owing. And the obligation is extended to include the land that he denied owing as well. So this is the principle of extending an oath. The oath would not apply if we were only arguing about the land. The oath would not apply if the land, if you admitted that you have all the vessels or none of the vessels. But if you're making a partial admission with regard to the vessels and the vessels are somehow linked to the land, then I can make you extend your oath about the remaining vessels to also include the land. Okay, so that's the principle that we're going to be discussing today. Now, the Gemara asks, what is this teaching, what we were talking about yesterday, which is where we were talking about vessels and vessels or vessels and land. So is this teaching the law of binding? According to this law, one who is obligated to take an oath in response to a claim can be required to take an oath with regard to an additional claim of land. But this cannot be, as we already learned this law in a Mishna in Tractate Kiddushin. When there is a claim brought against a person for movable property and land, and he is obligated to take an oath with regard to the property that does not serve as a guarantee, meaning the movable property, it binds the property that serves as a guarantee so that he is forced to take an oath with regard to it too. That's the law we just named. So the question is, why is this law repeated in Tractate Shavuot, right, which is a tractate about vows? Kiddushin is the tractate about marriage contracts. Now, we often find laws that don't necessarily have to do with the subject of the tractate that they're included in. The question here is, why would the exact same law be listed as a Mishnah in two separate places? And the Gemara answers that the Mishnah here in Shavuot is the main reference to this law, as it discusses the laws of oaths, whereas that Mishnah there in Tractate Kiddushin cites it incidentally in the context of a broader survey of the difference between these two types of property. I shouldn't have said vow, I should have said oaths. Right, so remember, so basically it's a slippery translation into English, but here we're talking about shavua. A shavua is an oath that you're made to swear in court about what you did or didn't do. A neder is a vow, and that's more like somebody vows not to, partake of a certain permitted food, which then becomes prohibited to him. Okay, now we're at the top of page 5a, and the Gemara asks, and I'm just curious. No. YouTube just refuses to load on my computer. Oh well. Okay. The Gemara asks, but according to Rav Sheshes, with regard to the one who says that in a case where the debtor says, here you are. So here you are is a principle we encountered yesterday. This is, let's say, the property under question. It could be money, could be, vessels, right? Here we've made the example of a dining room set. So I've said, I lent you a table and chairs. You say, Sal, you lent me the chairs. You never lent me the table. And so what about the chairs? If you say, and here you are, okay, you're challenging me on the table and chairs. Here's your chairs. Take them. Go. Godspeed, Sal. Take your chairs back. That's here you are. As opposed to saying, Sal, you lent me chairs, you didn't lend me a table. The chairs are at my house, the table, I never received it, right? So the difference is, and you're ready to say, here you are, take it back, right? So one of the views that we encountered yesterday was that if a person says, and here you are, take back the part that I admit to, then we exempt him from taking an oath about what he is claiming he never received. Now, that's not universally accepted. The other view is, okay, so here you are. You're ready to return it. All you're doing is admitting the same thing, that you received the chairs. Fine, you're ready to give them back right now. When I said give it all back, he said, here you are. But the fact is, I'm claiming that you also received a table and you're denying that. That's a partial denial. So that's why you should be made to swear the oath. So now, according to Rav Sheshes, with regard to the one who says that in a case where the borrower says or the debtor says, here you are, that he is exempt from taking an oath, why was it necessary for the verse to exclude a claim of land ownership from the defendant's obligation to take an oath when he admits part of the claim? The exclusion of land is derived from the verse, Exodus 22:8, for any matter of trespass, for an ox, for a donkey, for a sheep, for a garment, for any lost item about which one shall say, this is it, the claims of both of them shall come before the judges, right? So this is it. That list is meant to include all movable property to the exclusion of land. but all cases involving one who admits to part of the claim involving land are cases where the defendant effectively says, here you are, as land always remains in its location, right? You can't withhold land. You might withhold the deed, right? But everyone can see where the land is. And so here you are doesn't really apply since it's always ready to change hands. It doesn't go anywhere. Land is always where it is. Therefore, the derivation from the verse appears to be unnecessary. And the Gemara answers that Rav Sheshes could have said to you, the verse was necessary in a case where the defendant dug pits, ditches, and caves in the land that he is returning to the plaintiff. Since the land has been damaged and is no longer in its prior state, the defendant is not effectively saying, here you are. So alternatively, there is the case where one claimed that another owed him vessels and land, and the defendant admitted to the claim involving the vessels, and he denied the claim involving the land. Now, this is not a partial admission. That's what we saw when I read out the halach at the beginning of the class. If he admits to the vessels, that is a complete admission, right? Yes, I borrowed vessels from you. I owe you the vessels. Here they are, or I'm going to give them to you. But he's completely admitting about the vessels. Land, separate category. And when somebody makes a complete admission, no oath is triggered. And generally speaking, we don't, require an oath in matters regarding land, right? Because land, when it changes hands, you don't do that on an oral contract, on a handshake. Anytime land changes hands, there has to be a piece of paper, witnesses, etc. And that's why oaths don't apply to land changing hands. Now, come in here a proof for Rabbi Chia's opinion as... I'm sorry, I didn't read the explanation. So he admitted the claim involving the vessels and he denied the claim involving the land. And the verse teaches that although the defendant denied part of the claim, did not effectively say, here you are, he is not obligated to take an oath because he admitted completely with the vessels, and now the land is its own thing, and there's no oaths for land. Now, come in here a proof from Rabbi Chia's opinion, as Rami Bar Chama teaches a baraisa. All four types of bailees mentioned in the Torah require denial of part of the claim and an admission of part of the claim in order to incur liability to take an oath when someone claims to have given them an item as a deposit. And this applies to an unpaid bailee who receives no payment. This applies to an unpaid bailee and a borrower and a paid bailee and a renter, right? Those are the four kinds of bailees: unpaid bailee, borrower, paid bailee, and renter. Now, we've mentioned these four categories before. In all four cases, this is where somebody's going to be holding the property of another person, doesn't claim it became his own property, right? It's a situation where he's holding someone else's property for them. Either he's watching it as a favor, or he's getting paid to watch it, or he's borrowing it so that he can get the use of it, or he's a renter who's paying for the use of it. Now, we've discussed that before, but here's a nice little note from Rav Steinsaltz that delineates more clearly what the rights and responsibilities are of these four categories, right? The Torah has four categories of bailees, you could also say custodians, each of whom is administered an oath under different circumstances when unable or unwilling to return the item with which he was entrusted. An unpaid bailee, right? He has the least responsibilities because he's watching somebody else's property as a favor to them. An unpaid bailee is one who accepts an item for safekeeping without remuneration and without permission to use it for his own benefit. He is not required to reimburse the owner of the item if it is lost or stolen from him or if it is damaged due to an accident, and he is liable only if he is criminally negligent or if he misappropriates the item for his own use. And you'll see that law in Exodus 22, verses 6 through 8. A paid bailee, right? One who is paid to watch somebody else's property. A paid bailee is one who accepts an item for safekeeping for a fee. in addition to the responsibilities imposed on an unpaid bailee. A paid bailee must compensate the owner of the item if it is lost or stolen. That's what he was being paid to make sure it didn't happen, that it should not be lost or stolen. However, he is exempt from liability if the item is taken by force or if it is damaged due to an accident. You find that in Exodus 22, verses 9 through 12. The third type of bailee is a borrower. He is one who receives an item from its owner with permission to use it for his own benefit without having to pay for its use. That's a borrower. Since the borrower enjoys the full benefit of the use of the item, the Torah holds him responsible for it, and he must make restitution if it is lost, stolen, or destroyed, even as a result of an accident. He is exempt only if the item breaks as a result of ordinary use. And the last category of bailee is a renter who pays a fee for the use of the item. And the Torah in Exodus 22, verse 14, mentions this category, but does not define his responsibility. If the rented item is lost or stolen, does not define his responsibility if the rented item is lost or stolen. The sages dispute whether his responsibilities resemble those of a paid bailee or an unpaid bailee. In practice, the law is that he has the responsibilities of a paid bailee. Okay, so those are the four types of bailees who might be holding on to somebody else's property, and if they want to only return some of it, or their story doesn't have witnesses to back them up, they might be forced to swear an oath, and then their liability ends. Now, the Gemara elaborates. What are the circumstances in which the bailees both deny part of the claim and admit to part of the claim? Is it not referring to a case where the bailee said to the one who deposited the item, with regard to the items that I admit to having received from you, here you are. They're ready to be, you can take them back. And as to the rest, I never received them, and I am therefore not obligated to return them. Isn't that what the situation always is with regard to a bailee? That's different than somebody who borrows money and then goes to use it for something, right? Somebody, well, you could say a borrower, but here we're talking about items, right? So if you borrow your neighbor's hammer, or you rent his hammer, or you're paid to watch his hammer, or you're watching it for him as a favor. In all these cases, you have your neighbor's hammer. If he says, I lent you my whole hammer set, and you say, you only lent me one hammer. I don't know about those other hammers that you're talking about. So the hammer is here. You can give it back. That's why it's like, here you are. And then he claims that he never received something else. That would be the classic situation where he's made to swear an oath that he received nothing else, and then his liability ends. So with regard to the items that I admit to having received from you, here you are. And as to the rest, I never received them, and I am therefore not obligated to return them. And this supports Rabbi Chia's opinion that one who says, here you are, is obligated to take an oath. Just because he says, here you are, why should he escape taking the oath? The bottom line is he admits getting some of the property and denies getting the rest. Now the Gemara rejects this contention. No, there is a difference between one who says here you are and one who doesn't say here you are. Rami Bar Chama is referring to a different case. For example, a case where the depositor said to the unpaid bailee, I gave you 3 cows. And they all died due to your negligence, right? Criminal negligence. That's the only way that an unpaid bailee is going to be liable. You are therefore liable to pay for them. And the bailee said to him, with regard to 1 cow, this matter never happened, right? Meaning I only received 2 cows from you, not 3. And of those 2 cows that I did receive, one of them died due to an unavoidable accident. And as an unpaid bailee, I'm exempt from paying for it. And the other one, the remaining cow, died due to my negligence. And for that, I need to pay you. So in that case, although he admits to part of the claim, it is not a case of here you are, as he is not returning the cow itself, right? He admits that he received 2 cows and they're both dead. One was not his fault and one was his fault, and he's ready to pay for that. But there's a 3rd cow that the plaintiff claims, and he says, I never received that. So we're splitting up the claim into 3 slices, and each one has a different disposition. So we can't say that here you are always applies to a bailee. New subject. Come in here a challenge to the first law of Rabbi Chia, as the father of Rabbi Aptoriki taught in a baraisa, if one says to another, I have 100 dinars in your possession, and the other one says, nothing of yours is in my possession, and the witnesses testify that he has 50 dinars in his possession, that he owes the plaintiff, so one might have thought that he should take an oath about the remainder. And to counter this, the verse states with regard to bailees, for any matter of trespass, for an ox, for a donkey, for sheep, for a garment, or for any lost item about which one shall say, this is it, the claims of both of them shall come before the judges. And this indicates that you obligate the defendant to take an oath based on the admission to part of a claim by his mouth. But you do not obligate him to take an oath based on the testimony of witnesses. Now, this is what they were arguing about 2 days ago, right? The idea was, so if you say, very simple, right? You lent me $100. You say, you lent me $100. I say, no, you only lent me 50. That's classic situation. By the admission of my mouth, I admit to a partial claim. So I would pay you the 50 that I agree that I owe you, and I would have to take an oath that I never received that other 50, and then we're done. What if I don't admit anything, but then 2 witnesses come and say, Sal, we saw that you borrowed $50 from your friend here. So I never admitted that, but they established now by witness testimony that I received 50. So now am I made to swear an oath about the remaining 50? On the one hand, you would say, well, if we can establish a matter by just a partial admission and that leads to an oath, then all the more so, kal v'chomer, if we now thoroughly establish the matter with 2 witnesses, I should be made to swear an oath. Or the counter argument would be, it's in situations of a partial admission that that the Torah specifies swear an oath about the rest. But where it was not established by my own mouth, but rather by these 2 witnesses that came and established it, that has nothing to do with the Torah law, and so an oath does not apply, right? So those are the 2 sides of the argument. And that's why, to counter this, the verse states with regard to bailees, for any matter of trespass, etc., and this indicates that you obligate the defendant to take an oath based on the admission to a part of a claim by his mouth, but you do not obligate him to take the oath based on the testimony of witnesses. Now, the Gemara rejects that challenge. Are you raising an objection to the opinion of Rabbi Chia, who says that when the partial claim is established by the testimony of 2 witnesses, that the defendant does swear an oath about the rest? And so the Gemara says, are you raising an objection to the opinion of Rabbi Chia from a baraisa? Rabbi Chia himself is a Tana, right? A sage of the Mishnaic period, of the time of the Mishna. And as such, he has the authority to dispute the determination in a baraisa. Because after all, baraisas are contemporaneous with Mishnas, but Mishnas are more authoritative, right? So if Rabbi Chia appears in a Mishnah and you're bringing a baraisa to challenge what Rabbi Chia says, the baraisa is going to lose. You can use baraisas as evidence and for clarification, but when it's baraisa versus Mishnah, the Mishnah is going to win. Now the Gemara asks, but doesn't the Tana, right, whether the baraisa or the Mishnah, doesn't the Tana cite a verse? And the Gemara answers, according to Rabbi Chia, that verse teaches that one who admits to part of the claim is obligated to take an oath. And Rabbi Aptoriki's father could have said to you that both laws are derived from the expression, this is it, what you can point to. Since this is written and it is also written, it is interpreted that one word is stated to teach that one who admits to part of the claim is obligated to take an oath, and one word is stated to teach that in a case that involves a testimony of 2 witnesses, one is exempt from taking an oath. And the Gemara asks, and how does the other sage, Rabbi Chia, interpret the double qualification in the verse? And the Gemara answers, in his opinion, one word is stated to teach that one who admits to part of the claim is obligated to take an oath, and the other word is stated to teach that one is obligated to take an oath only if he admits that he owes an item that is of the same type as the subject of the claim. If the plaintiff claims one type of item and the defendant admits to owing a different type of item, then he is not obligated to take an oath. And this is very interesting, right? So if I say, hey, I lent you a bushel of wheat, I want my bushel back, right? You needed it last year when you were hungry. Now this year, the harvests have come in. I want my bushel of wheat back. And then you say, no, last year you lent me a bushel of barley, and I will pay you back a bushel of barley. Now, there's no oath, because what you're admitting to is not a partial claim to what I was claiming. If you said instead, no, Sal, you lent me half a bushel of wheat, and I'll pay you that, then I could make you swear an oath. But if you're claiming that what I lent you was totally different than what I claim I was lending you, that's not the situation of partial claim and an oath for the rest. And the other sage, Rabbi Aptariki's father, does not accept the principle that one is required to make an oath only if he admits that he owes an item that is of the same type as the subject of the claim. But rather, he holds like Rabban Gamliel in this matter. As we learned in the Mishna, Tractate Shavuos 38b, if one claimed that another owes him wheat, and the defendant admitted to owing him barley, which is less expensive than wheat, he is exempt from taking an oath, despite his admission of the claim, as his admission does not correspond to the claim. And Rabban Gamliel deems him liable to take an oath, right? Rabban Gamliel lost that argument, but his minority opinion was preserved in the Mishnah. Now, the Gemara relates, there was a certain shepherd to whom people would give their animals for safekeeping every day in the presence of witnesses. Why would you give your animals for safekeeping into the care of a shepherd every day? Well, because you have sheep that need caring. Why would you give it to the shepherd in the presence of witnesses every day? Because you don't trust the shepherd. You wanted witnessed every day how many sheep the shepherd undertook to take care for you. One day, they gave him their animals without witnesses. At the end of the day, he said to the owners of the animals, this matter never occurred. I never received the animals. Witnesses came and testified against him that he ate 2 of the animals. Rabbi Zera said, if Rabbi Chia's first law is so, the shepherd must take an oath with regard to the remainder, or else he must pay the value of the animals to their owners. Abaye said to Rabbi Zera, if Rabbi Chia's first law is so, the shepherd takes an oath? You want this guy to take an oath? Isn't he a robber? The witnesses established through their testimony that he took and ate some of the animals, and consequently his oath lacks credibility. Right? He didn't just, like if you receive animals to watch them and then you slaughter and eat them, you become a robber, and what's more, you're liable to the 4-fold payment for taking someone's sheep and then misappropriating it for your own use, and then rendering the misappropriation permanent because you slaughtered the sheep so that you could eat them. So this guy's a robber. The witnesses established through their testimony that he took and ate some of the animals, and consequently, his oath lacks credibility. We're not going to make him swear no to anything because we're not going to believe him. Rabbi Zera said to Abaye, I did not mean that the shepherd takes an oath. I was saying that the party opposing him takes an oath and collects payment. The people who said that they put their animals in this guy's care like they did every day, usually with witnesses, this day was done without witnesses, so no one saw how many animals were entrusted to him, but other witnesses established that he had some of the owner's animals and that he ate 2 of them. So now the owners swear an oath of how many animals they put in the care of the shepherd, and the shepherd has to pay for that many animals. That's the ruling here. And the Gemara comments, now to, and usually remember that a defendant swears an oath, but where the defendant has been established as lacking credibility, the plaintiff can swear an oath and then get a ruling in his favor. Now the Gemara comments now to, if it is so that the law is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Chia, who said that we swear an oath where the partial claim is established not by his own admission, but by the testimony of two witnesses. So let's read this again. Now, if it is so that the law is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Chia, and testimony of witnesses supporting part of the claim does not obligate the defendant to take an oath with regard to the rest, the court should still obligate the shepherd to take an oath due to the ordinance of Rav Nachman. And since his oath is not deemed credible, then the plaintiff takes an oath and collects the payment. What does Rav Nachman say? As we learned in a Mishna, Tractate Shavuos 38b, if one says to another, I have 100 dinars in your possession, and that person says, nothing of yours is in my possession, is there a partial claim? No, this is a full denial. Nothing of yours is in my possession. He is exempt from taking an oath because there was no partial admission. And Rav Nachman says, nevertheless, the judges do administer an oath to him. And what is this oath? This is the oath of inducement. The oath of inducement, which is known as the Shavua Hesed. Okay, not Chesed, which is loving kindness, but Hesed, okay, with an H and a T at the end. So this is the Shavua Hesed, and this is known as the oath of inducement. Rav Nachman instituted an ordinance that even if the defendant completely denies the claim, he is obligated to take an oath that the claim is false. And consequently, the shepherd is obligated to take that oath. And we're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Right now, your head's got to be going, what? By Torah law, and that's what we've been arguing, for 5 pages, and very carefully, we're only going to apply this oath if the person admits to owing part of it and denies the rest, and then he takes an oath that he does not really owe the rest of it in this partial admission, partial claim situation. Land, we said, totally separate category, and that's the Torah law. And now what we're seeing is that Rav Nachman innovated, legislated a rabbinic law, a rabbinic ordinance, So this is different than a Torah law. This is a rabbinic law. And he had a strong policy reason to do this. And this is where, there must be enough there. There's enough meat on the bone, when the plaintiff brings the case and the defendant denies it, that we don't just say dismissed because there's no evidence and he doesn't admit to it partially. But there's enough meat on that bone in the claim that's being brought that now the court is going to say to the defendant, okay, you can get out of this, but you have to swear that you owe nothing. So we're administering an oath even though there's no partial admission. And that actually is the law. The Shavua Hesed. One who completely denies a claim that is brought against him is exempt by Torah law from taking an oath. The sages instituted that he must take an oath of inducement. So what are the circumstances where we are going to make him swear that oath of inducement? Is it just anybody brings a claim against you and you deny it? Is that enough? We'll learn more about the oath of inducement later, but it exists. Now we're on 5b. Likewise, the law that if the defendant is suspect with regard to taking a false oath, the plaintiff takes the oath and collects the money. This is also a rabbinic ordinance, because we don't want people swearing oaths who have a known tendency to lie. What's the point of getting an oath from him? And we do not institute one rabbinic ordinance upon another rabbinic ordinance. That's true, Where we apply rabbinic ordinance as a fence around the Torah, we don't apply another rabbinic ordinance on top of that. So if we're going to make somebody swear an oath, even though there was no partial admission, okay, that's only by rabbinic ordinance. Shifting the oath from the defendant to the plaintiff, we do that, where the defendant is not trustworthy to take an oath. That's also a rabbinic ordinance. So what we don't do is shift to the oath from defendant to plaintiff in a situation where the oath is only being administered by rabbinic ordinance in the first place. was we don't multiply rabbinic ordinances on the same situation. Imagine if modern politicians were this careful about not over-legislating, right? The sages are well aware that there are limits to their power, and they will only go so far in trying to, help the population avoid coming to violate Torah laws, but we don't do a rabbinic ordinance on top of a rabbinic ordinance. Now, we are on 5b. The reason cited for the lack of credibility of the oath of the shepherd is that he has been found guilty of robbery by the testimony of two witnesses. And the Gemara asks, but why not let Rabbi Zera derive that he is disqualified from testifying or taking an oath, not because he was found to be a robber in this situation, but rather because he's a shepherd. Listen to this. Let it be that he's disqualified from either testifying or taking an oath because he is a shepherd. And Rav Yehuda says that an ordinary shepherd is disqualified from testifying. We're like, what? What do you mean? Moses was a shepherd. Abraham was a shepherd. Isaac was a shepherd. Jacob was a shepherd. David was a shepherd. Right? A lot of people in Jewish history were shepherds. And now you're telling us that any shepherd is understood to be a dishonest person? What? No, we're not saying that all shepherds are dishonest people. We're saying that shepherds in certain situations are suspect. Certainly, we have no evidence to know that he's not an honest person, but we're a little bit suspicious of shepherds. Why are we suspicious of shepherds? A shepherd is presumed to be a robber, right? We're going to be concerned that he could be a robber because shepherds allow the animals under their care to graze in the fields of other people. That's the problem. If they allow their animals to just go freely graze and not super careful to make sure that the animals don't enter private property, then then that shepherd has robbed. He has stolen the feed that these animals eat when they venture onto private property. He had no right, unless he paid for it, to let his animals graze on somebody else's land. Now, the Gemara rejects this approach because what he's saying there is, well, you don't have to do an ordinance on an ordinance that we shift the blame because he's a robber, and therefore the plaintiff should take the oath, but we're not going to do that because we're already making the defendant swear an oath where he denies the whole claim only by rabbinic ordinance. But what they're saying is, but wait a minute, this assumption that a shepherd is a robber because they so often let their animals graze on other people's land, that's not a rabbinic ordinance, right? That's just an interpretation of Torah law. But the Gemara rejects this approach. No. This is not difficult. La kasha. That case where he is presumed a robber is a case where he herds his own animals, right? So shepherds who own their own animals, they are presumed to be robbers. But this case, he is not presumed to be a robber because he's not herding his own animals. The whole situation is one where he's not herding his own animals. And shepherds who work for other people, not herding their own animals, are not presumed to be robbers. As, if you do not say so, if even one who herds the animals of others is presumably a robber, how do we give our animals to a shepherd? If we're going to say that all shepherds tend to be robbers because they allow their animals to graze on other people's land, then how could we ever hire a shepherd? Right? We're putting a stumbling block before the blind. We're creating a situation where he's going to rob. No, the assumption is only that people who own their own animals might let those animals graze on somebody else's land. But a shepherd who is an employee, or even a contractor, right? But he's not herding his own animals, we don't have this presumption because he's working for a wage, and we have no reason to assume he's a dishonest person or that, he will let the animals graze on land that is not his own. Right? As if you do not say so, if even one who herds the animals of others is presumably a robber, how do we give our animals to shepherds? Isn't it written, do not put a stumbling block before the blind? It is prohibited to cause others to commit a transgression. So rather, there is a presumption that a person sins only for his own benefit, and one would not commit robbery for the benefit of animals that are not his animals. Now, the Mishnah teaches this one. Now we're going back to our Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 1. And our Mishnah said about the two people who come to the court, each holding a garment, right, clutching the garment, and they both say, I found it, and all of it belongs to me. And the other one says, no, I found it, and all of it belongs to me. And they're having a tug of war. So in that situation, the Mishnah said, this one takes an oath that he does not have ownership of less than half of the garment. And that one takes an oath that he does not have ownership of less than half of the garment. And then they divide it. Either we cut it in half or we sell it and divide the proceeds. And the Gemara asks, does he take an oath with regard to the part that he has in his grasp, taking an oath that it is his? Or does he take an oath with regard to the part that he does not have, i.e. that he does not have a claim to less than half of the part that the other guy is holding? Now, the latter wording of that oath is problematic, as he may mean that he does not have a claim to the garment at all. So Rav Huna said he must take an oath in which he says, I hereby take an oath that I have a claim to it. And I hereby take an oath that I do not have a claim to less than half of it. And so the Gemara asks, well, but then let him say, I hereby take an oath that all of it is mine. That was his claim. Why don't we make him take an oath that all of it is his? That's what he says. Why does he take an oath that merely half of it belongs to him? And the Gemara answers, and would we give him all of it if he took such an oath? Since he will not be awarded the entire garment, they're both going to swear an oath and then they're going to split it, it would be inappropriate for the court to administer to him an oath that he owns all of it, right? If both of them swear that they own all of it, then one of them at least is lying. Maybe both are lying, but at least one of them is lying. And we don't want to create a situation where for sure people are swearing falsely. That's why we administer to them. They both believe they have full ownership to it, so they can truthfully say, it's all mine, and I swear an oath that I have a legitimate claim to no less than half of it. And the Gemara asks, but let him say, I hereby take an oath that half of it is mine. Why is the complicated formulation suggested by Rav Huna of I hereby swear an oath that I own no less than half of it? Why say that? Why not just say, I swear an oath that I own half of it? And the Gemara answers, if he takes an oath to that effect, that he only owes half of it, he compromises his initial statement, i.e. his claim that the entire garment is his. That's what he claimed. So that's why we wanted to make an oath that is consistent with his claim, but is not necessarily false. And that's how we arrived at this wording. I swear an oath that I owe I own no less than half of this garment. Now the Gemara challenges now too, when he takes an oath according to Rav Huna's formulation, he compromises his initial statement as he takes an oath only with regard to his claim to half the garment. And the Gemara answers, no, that is not so, as he makes the following statement to the court. All of it is mine. But according to your statement, I hereby take an oath that I have a claim to it, and I do not have a claim to less than half of it. Now the Gemara questions the requirement that the litigants take an oath at all. But since this one is standing with half the item in his grasp, and that one is standing here in the courtroom with half the item in his grasp, and each party ultimately receives what is in his grasp, they're going to divide it, why is this oath necessary? And why not just say, okay, they both claim it's theirs, split it, and we're done. Why make them swear an oath? And Rabbi Yochanan says this oath is an ordinance instituted by the sages so that everyone will not go and seize the garment of another person and say, it is mine. If any time two people are holding on to an object together, it's going to get split between them and there's no consequences, then, a lot of people are going to be dishonest and say, no, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. Yes, split it with me. That's fine. We can split it. Because they know they own nothing. Right? But really what happened here is both of them found it. Both of them believe it's theirs. So we're going to make them swear an oath to that effect. And this will discourage scoundrels, who will just, willy-nilly seize the property of others so that they can divide it with them. At the very least, they need to swear an oath, in court, in daylight, in front of witnesses, as to what they own and do not own. That's a formidable proposition, and not so many people will do that. It discourages that kind of activity. Now, the Gemara asks, but let us say that since he is suspect with regard to financial dishonesty, i.e. stealing another person's property and lying in court that it belongs to him, well, then he's also suspect with regard to taking an oath. If he's the sort of person who would grab half an object, then he's the sort of person that would also swear an oath. And therefore his oath should not be accepted. And the Gemara answers, in principle, we do not say that since one is suspect with regard to financial dishonesty, that he is also suspect with regard to taking an oath. And this is because even one who steals property is presumed to consider taking a false oath as a more severe transgression. As if you do not say so, then with regard to that which the merciful one states in the Torah, that one who admits to part of the claim must take an oath, let us also say that his oath cannot be accepted. As since he is suspect with regard to financial dishonesty, he would be also suspect with regard to taking an oath. Now the Gemara rejects this proof. There, in the case of the Torah, the debtor is presumably evading the creditor temporarily in accordance with the explanation of Rabbah that we learned a few days ago, that the debtor really intends to pay the entire debt, and the reason that he admits to owing only part of it right now is because he wants to buy time until he can afford to repay the entire debt. But here, with the two guys who claim they found this garment and that all of it belongs to them, they're not stalling for time until they can, come back with the money. So it's a different situation than the one who admits to a partial claim. Why are we even comparing this case to that case? And the Gemara adds, no, that this distinction is correct. No, K-N-O-W. That this distinction is correct, as Rav Idi Bar Avin says that Rav Chisda says, one who denies a claim that he received a loan and is contradicted by witnesses is fit to bear witness in a different case. By contrast, if one denies receiving a deposit and witnesses testify that he is lying, he is disqualified from bearing witness in other cases. Now, the reason for this distinction is that since money is borrowed in order to be spent, the assumption is that the debtor did so and his denial is merely an attempt to buy time until he can repay the debt. A deposited item, by contrast, may not be used by the bailee. So if he denies having received the deposit, he presumably stole it. Therefore, he is disqualified from bearing witness, and this demonstrates the distinction between lying in court about a debt and lying in court about a deposit of property. And the Gemara asks, but if one who denies having received a deposit is considered a robber, this is contradicted by that baraisa that Rami Bar Chama teaches. All four types of bailees mentioned in the Torah require denial of part of the claim and admission of part of the claim in order to be liable to take an oath. And these four are the unpaid bailee, the borrower, the paid bailee, and the renter. And since a bailee has no need to buy time, let us say that the court cannot administer an oath to the bailee, as since he is suspect with regard to financial dishonesty, he is also suspect with regard to taking an oath as well. And the Gemara answers, there too, in the case of a bailee, it is conceivable that the bailee is not a robber. Rather, the deposit was stolen, and the bailee is evading the depositor temporarily, thinking, if I have enough time, I will find the thief and seize the deposit and return it. Alternatively, if the deposit was lost, the bailee is thinking, I will find the deposit in the marsh and I will bring it back to him. Therefore, he is not considered a robber, but merely one seeking to buy time. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Gemara asks, if so, then why is one who denies receiving a deposit disqualified from bearing witness? Let us say, in that case too, he is evading the depositor, thinking, I will buy time until I will search and find the item. And the Gemara answers, in an ordinary case, one who denies receiving a deposit is not disqualified from testifying. When we say that one who denies receiving a deposit is disqualified from bearing witness, it is with regard to a case where witnesses came and testified against him
that at that time, when he denied the owner's claim in court, the deposit was in his house, and he knew that it was there. Alternatively, it is with regard to a case where he was holding the item in his hand. In those circumstances, it is obvious that he was not buying time, but rather he intended to keep the item. And the Gemara asks, but if one who is suspect of financial dishonesty cannot be administered an oath, now which Rav Huna says with regard to the law of bailees is difficult, as Rav Huna says that if a bailee did not return the deposit, claiming that it was lost or stolen, and says that he is prepared to pay for it, the judges nevertheless administer an oath to him that the item is not in his possession. Let us say that since he is suspected of financial dishonesty, he is suspect with regard to taking an oath as well. And the Gemara answers, thereto, the bailee is not suspected of outright robbery, as even if he took the deposited item for himself, he could rationalize his behavior, saying to himself, since I gave him money for the item, I did nothing wrong. Therefore, his oath is deemed credible, and an oath can be administered to him. We're going to stop there and pick it up tomorrow. But you can see how the sages are balancing, these issues, right? On the one hand, you want to make someone swear an oath where he admits or is found to be partially, in possession of what was claimed against him, and he denies the rest. So that's a situation for the oath. But we don't want an oath to be taken by somebody that we can't trust to be honest when he vows an oath, because it would be a meaningless oath, right? It would be meaningless if he is known to be a dishonest person and now swears in court that he doesn't owe this other property. So we want to be careful not to, attach an oath to such a person. On the other hand, claiming or establishing, let's say in court, that somebody is not trustworthy to swear an oath and thereby escape further liability, that's a very strong statement, right? That the word will get out. That guy was found dishonest. The court won't accept his oath. Who's ever going to want to do business with such a person? So they have to be very careful, right? If there's a way that we can understand where even though a person was found to be holding property that wasn't his, and he denied it, but he had either a legitimate explanation or a legitimate psychology about it, that he's not really a dishonest person, he was just, in a tough situation, then we don't want to establish him permanently by reputation as a dishonest person. So you see how careful the sages are, and we should learn from that to be very careful before we just come to a conclusion about a person. He's a liar. He's a thief. He's a jerk. We love to put people in boxes like that, and we must be very slow to pass judgment on people. Okay. Sharon, it is incredible to me the power of the swearing of an oath sufficient to adjudicate a grievance. Right? And that's why I always like to say, and that works in a pious community, right? I mean, people who don't think that their word is real, don't think that their word is their bond, don't think that their word, has tremendous significance in this world and the world to come, this world and the higher world, then that person is not somebody that we should want, be quick to accept their oath and thereby escape liability. But if we could live in a community of pious people where an oath is really that meaningful, that's a good community to live in. Wait, I'm not sure I understand this question. Give me a second. So I think this is a kind of poetic comment that Melly says, shepherds guide. They share guidance. How can they take if they are showing the way? Right. In other words, how can we say that they take? How can we accuse a shepherd of being dishonest? But if the sheep in the care of the shepherd, he allows them knowingly, his own sheep, to graze on someone else's land, then that would be misappropriating the food that they eat on that other person's land.
But if you're speaking a little bit more spiritually, a little bit more poetically, right, that's why it's a beautiful tradition that so many important people, in Jewish history had the job of being shepherds. And the greatest among them perhaps is Moses, right? So Moses, in that time between leaving Egypt and coming back, as Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, our redeemer, in the name of God redeemed us from Egypt, but Moses was his representative, as it were. Then Moses was the leader of 2 million people in the wilderness, for 40 years. Not an easy job. Not an easy. Herding cats, much easier than taking care of 2 million Jews in the wilderness for 40 years. But good training, being a shepherd and having responsibility for and being attentive to the needs, of every member of the flock. Right, so certainly shepherds are the kind of people that we would want to entrust, that we would want to look to. And maybe what the sages were responding to when they were talking about sort of shepherds in this later stage in Jewish history, later than Moses' time, 1,500 years later, or 2,000 years later, when the sages were talking about shepherds. Maybe in their locale, the prestige and the reputation of shepherds had suffered because the shepherds in that region were less trustworthy. And it's not something that we want to cast aspersions on shepherds generally, right? That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.